Thanks everybody for joining. This is the second part in our three-part series on Active Insight with Reveille. The topic of today's discussion is going to be about understanding your users and how that has a direct impact on the visibility and security for your content services platform. We'll be going through a dialogue that sets the stage for the changes that are happening in the ECM marketplace. We'll talk about how Reveille is looking at the problem more holistically than we have in the past. And we'll talk very specifically about what we're doing with the information that we're gathering about user behavior. So jumping right in, what we'll start by talking about today is what the marketplace is doing, and we'll breeze through this section, but it's worthwhile as a backdrop to the reasons why Reveille is doing what we're doing in the market. The ECM marketplace started as some infrastructure that was traditionally built as this back office solution for content management. It was a place, it was merely a place that that people stored records, stored documents, stored content, et cetera. And it was done primarily as a platform for providing compliance, an area where workflow could be added, an area where different processes could be automated, but it was also done generally with a single solution from a single vendor. Oh, the simpler times, right? So the approach generally was we make a decision at the corporate level for what repository we want or need in our environment, and we use that vendor as the solution in a stovepipe for the entire organization. Well, times evolve and change, and what we're seeing in the market now is this transition over to what the analyst community is calling the content services platform, which is really simply the evolution of what everybody's been doing in ECM for years or even decades. But it's an acknowledgement that there is this consolidation of content-related services from multiple vendors, meaning that the ECM products, I no longer have a single solution from a single vendor. I now have multiple solutions from multiple vendors. And the good news about that is that I get to play each of them to their strengths. And we'll talk a little bit about the side effects of that and how we can remediate against those further in the presentation. But fundamentally, the shift is these systems need to increasingly be treated as systems of record that live on the back end, and the updates that happen to those happen necessarily slowly. But I still need to be able to be agile on the front end, create applications for my users, create apps for my users that leverage those content services. So these different products go into this substrate that allows me to pull these services out and weave them into applications, which is phenomenal for the user experience that I can deliver to my customers, my partners, my employees. But it really also creates a series of challenges along with that. Because when you add together complex systems, each individual one of these applications, these ECM applications or components of your CSP by themselves can be complex. And when you add the complexity of those systems with multiple solutions from countless vendors, along with these new requirements for agility on the front end, for users growing accustomed to the appification, if you will, of the enterprise, or the consumerization of IT, or any other large worded or new worded phrase that the analyst community come out with to describe the movement that has been occurring, which is I'm guilty of this, and I would suspect most of us are, of being spoiled by the type of apps that are coming out that we're using on our phones, on our tablets, and inside of a browser every day. Well, our users expect that of us inside of the content space, and those new requirements added to all of these other pieces equals a generally poor experience if we're not handling it appropriately. And poor experience is a pretty big deal, because since the world is becoming increasingly all about the user, if that user's having a poor experience, they're going elsewhere, or they're not getting their work done. Another side effect of all of this is, with all of these different moving parts, it creates gaps, it creates security holes, and that can create either just simply issues for IT, all the way up and through creating company-wide issues to be handled by PR. And most of this falls back to an already chaotic IT organization to try to wrangle, manage, and maintain. And if we don't manage and maintain, then we see a loss in productivity. Poor user experience drives a loss in productivity. If somebody can't get done what they need to get done, if either the systems aren't performing properly, or they aren't constructed properly, or things aren't flowing the way that they're supposed to flow, then I lose productivity, whether that is productivity from a human actor or from some form of automation in the system that is jammed up because something's not happening the way that it is supposed to happen. So you're probably asking yourself, don't I already have something for that? And the answer is, you probably already have some general purpose tools to help you handle these type of issues. Most organizations have rightfully gone through the process of putting these general purpose or horizontal tools in place to attempt to handle some of these problems and some of these challenges. But the problem that most folks run into as they go the horizontal approach is that they notice a distinct lack of contextual understanding of the systems that these general purpose tools are managing. And that's because they're really good at being broad. They understand a little bit about everything. The problem is they don't understand a lot about anything. They don't have the solution stack details, and I don't mean from the application down through the infrastructure. I mean from the application up through the user, and understanding truly what's happening inside of a repository or inside of a set of capture services or across my collaboration suite. And almost all of them are lacking true visibility into user behavior. Not synthetic user behavior, but actual real user behavior and what's happening with each of their transactions in the overall system. So in the context of an analogy, let's talk about why context matters, or why specific matters. And the analogy is around a house and understanding whether or not the house is healthy. And that's not just from any one particular perspective, but we'll look at it from, is the house burning down or not? And there are two different ways of going about, general ways of going about noticing this. One is I can be outside the house and I can be looking at the house. I don't have to be this guy who's walking a dog singing a song, not paying attention, but they could be on that bench and they could be staring directly at that house, and they're not going to know that there's a fire until a window explodes and smoke and fire come billowing out. And let's contrast that to having somebody inside the house. Somebody inside the house that's already armed with a fire hose, that is supported by a series of sensors for smoke and heat and air quality and a number of other things, informed by a series of alerts and alarms, and backed up with the knowledge of the specific floor plan of this house. They know every nook and cranny of the house. They're inside the house. They're being told everything that's going on, and they're ready with a hose. So at the moment that a spark or the things that lead up to a spark happen in the house, there's somebody there to handle it. So it's pretty easy to see the difference between the approaches. And general purpose has a place. Everybody needs a general purpose tool to handle the overall aspect of the IT organization. But in order to truly manage and get the most out of what's happening of your content services platform, you really need the specificity of somebody inside of that house. And in the context of this analogy, what is FHIR? It's all of those things I mentioned earlier in the presentation. It's users that are having a bad time. It's IT that's pulling their hair out. It's security holes that are causing an untold amount of grief or risk or data loss or exposure. And the fundamental thing of lost productivity, which leads to loss in competitive stance, et cetera, et cetera. So bringing all of these things together, you can't just focus on the experience of the users or the behavior of the user or the operations of your environment. You really need to focus on all three of these, and that's where Reveille sits. And for the rest of the presentation, we're going to drill in very specifically to the user behavior area and what we're doing in that space and what we're doing with the data that we're gathering. But fundamentally, what you'll see our offering is around these three different pillars of customer experience, user behavior, and sustainable operations, and how all three of those work together to give you a great CSP. So let's talk about user behavior and security to begin with. Backed up by a series of statistics, 1 in 3 companies today are gathering user behavior information, but 75% of them would like to be. And the reason is because until you understand what your users are doing, you are exposed. User analytics measures a change, a baseline of behavior from which a deviation can be spotted. And when that deviation is spotted, it helps expose these insider threats and compromised accounts. Because when somebody is doing something significantly different from what they normally do, we might want to take a look at that, and we might want to react to it. And we certainly want to react when we notice compromised activity. Let's look at it from another perspective of audit. And everybody hates them, but everybody has to go through them. And one of the reasons people hate them is because 8 out of 10 folks say that their audit cycle is 3 months or more per audit. 3 months is a really long time to be focused on something that generally does not provide any level of increased service or productivity to our end users. But it's a necessary evil to make sure that everything's being taken care of. Increasingly, and so 70% of firms are expecting these regulations to get worse, not better. And part of the issue, the reason why it takes 3 months to respond to this is because everybody is digging around in log files inside of each of these applications to try to be able to answer the questions that the auditors are asking. And that takes a significant amount of time, and it takes a significant amount of money to do. So anything that can help with that process should be seen as a level up. Let's talk about quantifying user behavior. What are the kind of questions that we should be able to answer or ask of our CSP and get answers back? You know, do each of you have visibility into authorized user transaction patterns? You know, one example that I love to use because it came from one of our customers is that they wanted to be able to notice when there was a significant difference in the amount of document access that was happening over a period of time. But the fun way that I try to tell it is we'll have somebody, we'll call him Edward, and if Edward normally accesses 50 documents in a week but is suddenly accessing 50,000 documents on a Friday, well, that's a big deal. Even though he has access to those documents, it's noticeable. It should be noticed that that big behavioral change has occurred. So getting a visibility into user transaction information is quite important, and being able to baseline that data. What particular content is being accessed by users or not accessed by users? Application login patterns and locations. If I have a single user that or a user credentials that are being attempted from 7 different geographic locations within a 30-minute period, I can be relatively assured that that's an attempted attack. Likewise, if I have a single location that is attempting to access multiple different logins in a short period of time, I can also likewise believe that there's a high likelihood of attack. So I can really triangulate in on a series of different security issues if I understand what the users are doing. Taking a look at specific document access by specific IP addresses or ranges. Is it odd to me that this particular document was accessed from this particular location because all of the people that are supposed to be accessing that document aren't in that location? Right, so again, spotting behavioral deviations becomes not only interesting but actually incredibly important as we look towards securing the overall environment. Can I look at who has accessed a document and who has not accessed a document? Take an example of a set of regulations that everybody in the company needs to have read. Well, if I have that in my repository and I have a system like Reveille, I can tell you whether or not everybody has accessed that document. I can tell you who hasn't accessed that document. So you start to see some very interesting use cases jump out of this. Which users are accessing which repositories? You can look at that both from a security standpoint, but you can also look at it from a planning standpoint. Do I have the correct balance of documents across my repositories? And can I see alerts? When things go wrong or when things go out of norm, can I see what's happening? Can I be told what's happening? Can my attention be drawn to it? And can I automatically react to it? So we look at this across we look at user behavior across 2 different disciplines. The first is behavioral security, and we've already talked about this, establishing a normal pattern of behavior for each user in the system so that we can notice when they are acting in an abnormal way. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, but more than likely, I do want to know about it. And monitoring every point of access across the enterprise. And the second discipline is audit, being able to drill down into specific end user activity to accelerate the discovery process and answering auditing questions. So building out that security baseline and being able to take a look at these normal patterns of behavior and what documents are accessed by user and access counts and deviation detection and automatic remediation. And then that remediation is enforcing with intelligence. Right? So automatically taking a look at how the system and how the content is accessed or attempted to be accessed, recognizing invalid login patterns or strange access locations, monitoring all the different points of access, and responding to this abnormal behavior very, very quickly. And then audit, respecting compliance. And you can see here that we have a list of very specific transactions. And this is the specificity or the context that I've been referring to. You can see here that we have open document, checkout document, delete document, add document, and so on. These are very specific types of transactions inside of a CSP. They are not user A, open transaction X, from IPY, which is generally the best that you could hope for from a general purpose or horizontal tool. What we're doing is we're adding the ability to see the user transaction with also the ability to understand the user transaction and bringing that context together for you in a series of reports, in a series of visualizations, et cetera. And impressing your auditors and getting on with your day. And so being able to answer questions at lightning speed, not having to put on your mining hat and jump into a series of log files and applications to try to get the data to back up the answer for each of these auditors. Being able to get to the heart of the matter quickly and then moving on. So how all of this works together. So you'll see this description used by Reveille more and more as we go forward because it's a visualization of where we fit and how we do what we do. It's a bit to take in, so I'll guide you through it. In the lower right-hand corner, we're going to start in that gray area labeled sources. And you can see a bunch of very important vendors in this space that have been in this space for a long time and have a series of products that are well implemented across most enterprises that care about content. You'll also see a user icon down there, and that just represents the fact that we're looking at user transaction volume and user transaction detail across all of these systems. And we're going to go to the left through orange of Harvest because what we've done is we've codified how to get information out of these applications and from around these applications and from the users. So in many cases, we are using 5 to 10 different access methods of getting information. So it's not just simply consuming a RESTful API out of one of these repositories. It's actually using a multi-channel data harvesting mechanism to pull all of this information out and throw it into our data store. And that's where we begin to analyze that data, to distill it down into insight or into action. So I'm either taking a look at all of this large volume of data coming in and pushing it up to visualize so that a human can take a look at it in very rich dashboards, et cetera, or the system is reacting automatically on our behalf to something that's happening in the environment. Either of those paths are available once we start to analyze the data. The visualization happens across any device, and you'll see increasing amount of time spent on how we allow our customers to visualize data in very, very rich and interesting ways. That leads to action, whether it be automated from the analyze phase or whether it be manually requested from a client during the visualize phase. But being able to act is really important because intelligence or insight without action is pretty useless. Right? If somebody tells me that the bank is being robbed but doesn't do anything to get in the way of the bank robber, then it's not really terribly interesting information. All it tells me is that I've had a bad day. It doesn't help me avoid that bad day. So ACT is actually very important, and that's the active part of Active Insight. And what we've done is made it very easy to cause direct contextual actions to occur inside of any one of these systems. So in our Edward example, if he starts to access a significantly large number of documents or we see that ramp up, our reaction could be to go into the system and suspend his access. From a performance perspective, it could be I see a performance issue rising and then I do something to shake a hung batch loose, or I restart an application server in the infrastructure. There's really a myriad of responses that we can do, but we've encapsulated a lot of that intelligence into the system itself. So in summary, your content services platform is complex already and it's evolving. It's becoming more complex. It's not becoming less complex. General purpose tools are necessary and the right decision, but they're incomplete if you want to get to the right level of service. You can get ahead of that fire with context. It is very hard to do that without context. And not knowing the user behavior costs your organization significant time and money in a variety of different ways, whether that be lost productivity, security issues, et cetera, et cetera. And that visibility enhances my overall security and my audit capabilities. And that point that I just made a minute ago, which is intelligence without action isn't useful. I think that's very, very key. Most vendors that provide some level of reporting or analytics do so such that you are now armed to go and do something on your own if you'd like to go do something on your own. What we're doing is we're trying to bring that full circle such that we enable you to actually act either automated or very quickly from a manual perspective. And we're here to help. We have a very impressive and revamped product coming out in the next couple of months called Reveille 8. And that product represents all of the stuff that I just went through in this presentation. And I encourage you to visit our website and take a look in much more detail about the disciplines that we covered today, as well as the rest of the disciplines that are enabled in the product. And with that, I'll pause for questions. I should have mentioned earlier on that we would get to a question section, and that it's very easy to ask one just through the Q&A window inside of WebEx. And I'll pause for a moment while I take a look and see about the questions that have already been posed and allow you time to ask the questions that you'd like to. All right, there we go. So I do have a couple of questions. The first of which looks like this one is from Supreet. And the question is, this seems like a new direction for you guys, is it? And I'd say the short answer to that is yes and no. We aren't leaving our performance roots, but one of the things that we noticed is that there are two main things that were noticed. One is that the data that we're already gathering is actually quite useful outside of just the context of performance. And two, the amount of visibility and control that is required across the increasingly chaotic CSP landscape is vast. And we can provide value with the data that we're already gathering. So I wouldn't say that it's a completely different direction. I would say it's an evolution of what we've been doing and just making and providing more value out of the data that we're already gathering. Next question from Marilyn. This is a slightly more technical question. How are you gathering the user traffic? Are you using agents? And the answer there is no, we're not using agents. And what we're doing is we're participating on the network, and we're watching all the user transactions as they flow by. We're grabbing the ones that are interesting inside the context of CSP, right? So transactions that are being executed on components of your CSP by users, whether they be internal or external. We're grabbing the piece parts of those transactions and reconstructing them front to back. We dissect the different stages of it, so we know the web part of the request, the app server part of the request, any specific protocols that happen to occur in between the application server and the back-end system, all the way through the database. And so we actually get a significant level of detail on each one of these user transactions, and we can bubble that up into being interesting and important across a number of different disciplines, the ones that we talked about today from the aspects of security and audit, but also from a performance perspective. You can certainly see that it's not a stretch to if we have that level of detail to being able to understand exactly where problems are and where we need to focus our energy. All right, it looks like that is those are the only two questions that were asked. So I'll close by saying simply thank you for your time. I hope this was interesting and useful. Please do come by our website and take a look at much more information and much more detail about what we've gone through today. And I encourage you to sign up and take a look at what Reveille can do inside of your organization as well. This has been recorded and will be available on our website, as well as the third part in this series where we'll talk about that third pillar. We talked about customer experience already. Today we talked about user behavior, and next month we'll be talking about sustainable operations. In other words, what are the disciplines that need to be enabled for me to manage the operations of my environment and make sure that they can handle the increasing load over time and report on things as they need to be reported on. So hope to see everybody back for that webinar. Hope you had this was a valuable use of your time today. Thanks for coming and have a great day. Bye-bye.